Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting a few seconds early here. Welcome back to Gnostic Media's UnSpun episode number 82. I'm joined again by Jacob Duellman. We're here again to discuss chronology and Scaliger and all things about that. Jacob has found a lot more research since he was on last month. Also, thanks to everybody who supported the show and donated the last couple of weeks. I really appreciate the mailed donations as well. And so anyway, hopefully, Jacob, you got some donations to help out with computer issues and stuff. I know we were trying to get you money on that. Nothing yet, huh?
No.
No. Well, that's too bad.
I did test my email through PayPal at jacobduellman@gmail.com. And a friend of mine tried it, and it did work and went through. So if anybody would like to make a donation,
we're trying to get you donations for a new computer last time because you ended up spending all your cash on books and research materials. And also, folks, just so you know, there is a donate button there in the chat room on the live feed. So it's always appreciated when people click that. Somebody clicked that last week and I think like 2 people have ever clicked that one, and most of them usually go to the website. But yeah, the website, gnosticmedia.com. Donate button up on the top. Greatly appreciate your support. It is mostly listener-sponsored. Please also check out the store page and bookmarks, all the good stuff we have up there. Jacob, welcome back. Of course, somebody's texting me right when we start. I got to mute that. But anyway, welcome back, dude. And, let's dive in. We have a lot of material to cover tonight. I think the show is probably going to go over so that we can cover all of the new research on Scaliger and the whole history. Basically, to summarize what Jacob has come across is kind of the history of propaganda, probably all the way back to, as far as we can take it, I suppose, since under Scaligerian chronology, almost all history is faked, and you can't really get anything past like 1699 anyway, because They've done everything to wipe out the history of the existence of Tartary, and so all else kind of follows from there. So, where do you want to start?
Well, if the audience members might recall, Scaliger, Notatus, Hallucinatio, Scaligeri, parts 1 and 2, treated on Joseph's father, Julius Caesar Scaliger. And in those episodes, through a dictionary called a General Dictionary, Historical and Critical, I came across several citations pointing to a fraud behind the name Scaliger. Basically, Julius Caesar lied about his age, or not lied about his age, lied about his birth.
And you're talking about Julius Caesar Scaliger, just so people are clear.
Yeah. Julius Caesar Scaliger, right. Yes. Lied about his birth when he went to Agen, France to serve as physician for the Bishop of Agen. And he did this, what I'm suspecting, as a means to convince a family who had a 13-year-old girl that he was a man of noble blood and therefore was worthy of her hand in marriage. And they had severe reservations about that. He was, I believe, aged 46 at the time when he started courting her. No, I think he was 43. They married at 46. And by the time she reached age 16, after 3 years of persistence, he finally won her hand from the family. And it was because of the name that fraud, which he was able to pass along. So from a general dictionary, historical and critical, I think that's kind of where we can kind of start tonight's episode, as that's where my outline begins. And it's just a kind of a rehashing of what this book is and why it's important. This book features perhaps the earliest encyclopedic biographical articles on the lives of Julius and Joseph Scaliger. Featuring the original articles of Pierre Bayle, who is the original author of the dictionary. It was called Le Dictionnaire historique et critique. It was printed in France in the late 1600s. Go to episode part 2 for more expansion on those details. I'm not going to do that now off the top of my head. So Pierre Bayle is translated in English by John Lockman in this English translation. This book expands on the initial work of Bayle by extending the biographical entries to the distinguished lives of the British Isles. This new original articles are supplemented by Reverend Thomas Birch, Fellow of the Royal Society, and Reverend John Peter Bernard, Fellow of the Royal Society. They've won those fellowships because of their contributions to this book, which is pretty rare for the Royal Society to do this.
Let's do this before we move further. So why don't we give a little recap of what we've done in the prior episodes for the audience who hasn't caught the shows before and may not understand how history was faked, how the Dark Ages didn't happen, etc., and how the Jesuits were behind this faking of history. But why don't we give a little recap and then a little direction of what the audience can expect tonight?
Well, I think you might be able to treat on the faking of history a little bit more, just because my mind is so trained on the research that I've done for this show. So if you want to kind of freshen the audience up on that, I think that'd be helpful to me, just because I'm focused.
Well, what we're finding out, and just to give a brief rundown, is we had basically been piecing this together, and several of us, including Steve Outram and Jacob and myself and a couple other people, we'd been getting the sense that more, and for me, it was in writing my Spies in Academic Clothing article, which made me realize how academic cells or intelligence cells operate and how they create this web, and then they cite each other to legitimize an official history. And while the public thinks that it's the writing about a single truth, it's really the writings of a single group influencing that truth. So you'll have, like, typically a cell is composed of 3 scholars, sometimes up to 5. I've seen, larger cells like what appears to be coming from, in my opinion, from Trine Day Publishers, where you have many operatives out of there. But so these cells, you'll have, like, let's say Gordon Wasson, Charles McLean Andrews from Yale, and Andrew Nevins, historian, all colluding in the background to tell an official story, and then you have multiple publications provided to the public that tell the official version, even though behind the scenes they're colluding. And then from there, what you have is cells citing other cells to keep that create a net or a web sort of this false history. So I had written about this and how all of the major books on MKUltra were written by the intelligence community and faking that history. And then we started looking at archaeological sites and things like that. So then you think of, like, Stonehenge and how it was moved and aligned with the stars and basically created in the 1950s with a bunch of Disneyland stones, right? So then you start thinking, well, what about Greece? What about Athens? And then, of course, Fomenko addresses Athens, and then you think, well, Egypt, and they claim Egypt is 5,000-6,000 years old, and of course there's no evidence for that, and the history of these opinions varies by thousands of years from one scholar to the next. None of these scholars agree on the history, and describing the same kings, they can vary by 3,000 years in their description. So imagine, like, varying our current history and what we think we know by thousands of years just in the blink of an eye. And essentially that's what you can do. And to compensate for this, they created a false Dark Age, and they just inserted a 1,000-year period into history. And that was essentially as a distraction and to cover up what appears to be that the Inquisitions were much more current than we're told. They weren't like 1,000 years ago. They were more like 300-400 years ago. And, so they rewrote history to cover that up and to cover up the history of the Dionysian mysteries and the Bacchanalia in Europe that were coinciding with Christianity, because apparently under the notion of Athena, the Virgin Mother Goddess, you have virgin childbirths, which one apparently was Jesus and the other one apparently being Dionysus. So you had the Dionysian, Bacchus, Pan, plant, drug mysteries on the one side, that the former, what was Tartary in Rome, or somebody at that point attempted to shut it down and suppress the Dionysian side of things and remove it. Apparently, Christianity was really more about natural law. The Bible was not about religion. That may be a hard concept for people to get their mind around. But so all of this surrounding what appears to have been the Council of Trent and Joseph Scaliger, they rewrite the history from the 14th century through the 16th century, at least what we call that now, and rewrite everything. And they take about 200 years up to about 1699. They implement a new calendar then to erase this old history, to erase the history of Tartary and the Tartarian people. And Tartary was essentially this massive empire based on natural law that ran from probably, it looks like, Scotland and the British Isles all the way to the Americas, and very possibly as far down south as the Incan Empire. And apparently this was all one massive history. And if you look at the timing and the arrival of Cortez and the Americas and that whole thing, you know, and the sequestering of all of the Aztec or Mexica history under Montezuma and all of this stuff, we have the potential of a complete rewrite of history, and them sending out agents to make sure all of this stuff was suppressed everywhere. And then, you know, so history is changed. That's a lot to try to cram into a couple of minutes there, but I hope I gave the idea justice. I should also mention that John Allegro had figured out all of this whole Dionysian angle, and he was saying that the Bible was based on this, but a lot of this stuff may have been inserted later when they rewrote the Bible, rewrote these documents in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then in 1970, he publishes The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, exposing this fertility drug cult coinciding as part of Christianity itself. But when we realized that the Dark Ages were falsely inserted there, then we can see this new history of this Bacchanalian these Bacchanalian rites going on in Europe and the suppression of it, and then why they attacked Allegro just about in the exact same manner, in fact, that they attacked Fomenko and myself. You know, so you delete that 1,000-year period. Fomenko in his book argues that this was one of the reasons why they created the Dark Age, was to cover up the Bacchanalia and make it look like ancient pagan history rather than a few hundred years ago in Europe. And, you know, and anyway, create the fake history, push it back, and when you look at what Allegro discovered, he discovers essentially the same thing. Allegro did not realize that history had been faked, though, that history was not linear. So you put the two together, and it has a pretty interesting outcome. Sorry to be so long-winded there.
No, I think that was necessary. You did a really good job of kind of connecting intelligence groups and their way they create echo chambers in their cells, and then broke that down all the way into history and the basically the
and now I'm going to hand it over to you to basically explain the whole history all the way from medieval times to now of how these intelligence cells work to rewrite history and to cover things up, you know. And you know, they just create these damn cells. But for the audience, really quickly, read my Spies in Academic Clothing article. It really breaks it down so that you really understand how a group of people can influence the so-called truth. And so it's really getting in and breaking apart the fallacies that they use and reverse engineering them, that you can understand how history can be rewritten and how it seems to be constantly these occult fraternities and the intelligence community behind this crap.
I think we might get a nice little glimpse of that as we proceed through this outline.
Well, let's dig in. Yes. I'm just going to shut up and let you talk for like the next 45 minutes because there is a lot to cover here. So you should probably just, dig through it. Try not to go too deep so we don't lose the audience. Just try to hit all the hard stuff and let's yank them in so that they really get how this was done. Okay, so I just talked about a general dictionary, historical and critical. What I'm doing in this episode is I'm going to be going through 3 source books of material. I'm going to primarily focus on one. That'll be the third book I'll be getting to. And I'm just kind of treating on the first 2 because they are the sources of the language and the biography. So a general dictionary, historical and critical, is the biography. The claim to fame for these books, it's a 10-volume set. Not all the digital copies are available online, but I definitely encourage people to look them up.
and kind of read it, because the claim to fame for these books are the extensive citations of primary and secondary sources, in addition to exhaustive footnotes that often contain more information than the article itself. It's quite fascinating to read. It's really neat to look at. You could get lost into it for years and years and years and years and years and probably not finish reading the book. Okay, so the second book I'll be treating on throughout the entire study of Scaliger is A Dictionary of the English Language by Samuel Johnson. This was printed in 1755. This is about just over a decade after a general dictionary, historical and critical. This is a landmark achievement in English language dictionaries. This publication is contemporary to a general dictionary, historical and critical, and acts as a guide to understanding the grammar of words employed in this study. Samuel Johnson is acquainted with Reverend Thomas Birch, a fellow of the Royal Society, speaking of him thusly, quote, "Tom Birch is as brisk as a bee in conversation, but no sooner does he take a pen in his hand than it becomes a torpedo to him and benumbs all his faculties." Now, before we proceed, it is worthy to note that Reverend Thomas Birch is involved with the secretive collaborative behind the Athenian Letters, a commentary and letter form on Thucydides. As we progress through Scaliger's biography and his works in this series, we will treat this topic in more detail. For now, I will include the following from Wikipedia. The Athenian Letters was a collaborative work of ancient Greek history and geography, published by a circle of authors around Charles York and Philip York, and taking the form of commentary and letter form of Thucydides. It had a considerable vogue. While still college students, the brothers York planned the work, which was begun in 1739 and appeared in 2 volumes, 1741 and in 1743, initially in a very small private edition. Others involved anonymously were Thomas Birch, Henry Coventry, John Green, Samuel Salter, Catherine Talbot, Daniel Ray, George Henry Rook, John Heaton, John Lowry, and William Heberden. The authorship was for a long time a well-guarded secret. A 1-volume edition in 1781 ran to 100 copies, the first edition having been only of 10, and later editions and a French translation followed. I'd really love to see those books. The Scaliger Collection. This is the third book. The third book is called The Scaliger Collection. This is edited by Spitzkamp Oriental Antiquarium, with supplements by Alastair Hamilton, Anthony T. Grafton, and H.J. De Jong. This was printed in 1993. Now, I went through a great deal of trouble to get this book. It is a private, limited print book that is scarce and expensive.
Now, there was a bookseller out here in the L.A. area that actually ripped you off for a copy. Did you ever get your money back for that?
I finally settled the dispute yesterday, and I got my money back. And the seller indicated to customer service that the order was filed in error, although I had been in contact with him. He promised to look into it, and then proceeded to ignore my follow-up emails every consecutive week following that email. So, you ignore somebody and you try to hold their money for a month and never send the book, and then you say it was filed in error.
Yeah.
It's like a shady businessman.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah. I won't name him though. That's okay. We'll just leave him as a shady businessman.
He lives and works in a port in San Pedro.
So this book was printed by Spitzkamp Oriental Antiquarium and is intended as a guide to the Scaliger Collection, which was up for auction in its entirety in 1993. Now, this is from the book itself, quote, "A collection of over 200 antiquarian books by and about Josephus Justus Scaliger, with full descriptions, with a checklist of all known Scaliger publications, with a checklist of the Scaliger Annotati, with a full index to Bernays' Scaliger biography printed in 1855. With a preface by Alastair Hamilton, this collection is for sale as a whole and will include a fine painting after the famous 1604 Scaliger portrait in the Leiden University Library." Now, the University of Leiden is where Scaliger closed off his career and passed away in, I believe, 1609. And that's, I think, where a lot of his papers and books were held, and where his adopted son, Daniel Heinsius, who we'll talk about in later episodes, also worked as the head librarian. and that'll be interesting when we get to it. There's also a supplement, Joseph Scaliger, a bibliography, 1850 to 1993, by A.T. Grafton and H.J. De Jong. It's printed in Leiden, Smith's Camp Oriental Antiquarium, 1993. Now, before I proceed, I just want to say another thing. I've only found one. I was very lucky to get this book because there's only one other copy available online, and I'm very fortunate to get it. And the seller shipped it to me in 3 days. I mean, how fantastic is that? Great customer service out there in New York State.
I wonder if the guy out here was a hippie liberal.
He might be. So, Alistair Hamilton.
Oh, wait, before you continue, somebody wants to know how they can donate to you again. Why don't you give out your email address again?
You could. My email address is Jacob, Jacob, Duellman, Duellman, @gmail.com. Now, this email is linked up with PayPal and it should work, but somebody else had tried to do it about a month ago before I had my friend check, and they had problems. So if it doesn't work, send me an email, and I'll try to figure out why PayPal doesn't want me to receive any money from people.
All right, there you go.
All right, so Alistair Hamilton, and thank you very much, too. I really appreciate it, all the support.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the support. Can't do it without audience support. Anyway, go ahead.
So Alistair Hamilton. Alistair Andrew Hamish Hamilton, Master of Arts, PhD, and curiously, a Fellow of the British Academy, is an English historian. His education, he's the only son of publisher Hamish Hamilton and his second wife, Yvonne Vicino Pallavicino. Hamilton was educated at Eton College and read modern languages at King's College, Cambridge, proceeding Masters of Arts in 1967. He received his PhD in Divinity in 1982. Eton College, isn't that... there's someone really famous that went to school there, wasn't there? That wasn't D, was it? No, I don't think so. Let me just look that up.
I don't have it.
I have my brain database. Let me just type that in really quick. So you have Evelyn John St. Louis Strachey. Okay, John Maynard Keynes. Okay, we'll get back to these boys a little bit later. Go back to...
The constant loop around of the same group of people.
Some Bloomsbury Group guys. All right, so Hamish Hamilton Limited. Now, Hamish Hamilton is a publisher, and he started a publishing company called Hamish Hamilton Limited. And this was a British book publishing house founded in 1931, eponymously by the half-Scot, half-American Jamie Hamilton. Hamish is a vocative form of the Gaelic Seamus, meaning James. James, the English form, which is also his given name, and Jamie, the diminutive form. Jamie Hamilton was often, I just got a little prompt there. Jamie Hamilton was often referred to as Hamish Hamilton. The publishing brand, Hamish Hamilton, is currently an imprint of the Penguin Group. Hamish Hamilton Limited originally specialized in fiction and was responsible for publishing a number of American authors in the United Kingdom, including J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. Hamish Hamilton Law and Hamish Hamilton Medical were started in 1939 but closed during the war. Hamish Hamilton was established in the literary district of Bloomsbury and went on to publish a large number of promising British and American authors, a large number of whom were personal friends and acquaintances of Jamie Hamilton. Now, this is the location of the Bloomsbury Group, which I just mentioned a moment ago about Eton College. It was founded by members of the Cambridge Apostles, a group of friends from Trinity and King's College. Notable members include Bertrand Russell, Lytton Strachey, Roger Elliott Fry, E.M. Forster, John Maynard Keynes, Leonard Woolf, and his wife, Virginia Woolf. Now, keep Leonard and Virginia Woolf in mind. We'll be returning to them later on in the presentation. In my brief research, I have not directly linked Jamie Hamilton to the Bloomsbury Group, but I have found there within social circles, however, as we've also seen by the Eton College connections as well. Now, Jamie Hamilton sold the firm to the Thomson Organization in 1965, and the Thomson Organization resold it to Penguin Books in 1986. Hamish Hamilton's aim remains to publish innovative literary fiction and nonfiction from around the world. Authors include Elaine de Botton, Esther Freud, born in London, and this is an aside by me, who's born in London. Freud is a daughter of painter Lucian Freud, and Bernardine Coverley. She's also great-granddaughter of Sigmund Freud, who we'll talk about a little bit later. This list of authors also include Toby Litt, Redmond O'Hanlon, W.G. Sebald, Zadie Smith, William Sutcliffe, R.K. Narayan, Paul Thoreau, and John Updike. Hamish Hamilton also publishes online a literary magazine called Five Dials. Now, when searching for Penguin books in my brain database, curiously, I find two titles listed: 120 Days of Sodom and the uncensored Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. These books lead back into Gerald Gould, the propagandist and shill for Victor Gallant's, Percy Stevenson, Aldous Huxley, and all of the Fabianism associated with mass observation and etc.
Yeah, so, we're beginning to really see the influence of mass observation on the Fabian Society, which then bleeds via Aldous Huxley and all of these guys into the CIA's MKUltra program and on to everything that we see going on now and all of the Tavistock transgender et al. Agendas they're promoting right now.
Oh, and I could do an episode off of this paragraph because I have a lot of detail, but we'll have to probably save that for another time. But people who are interested in those names, I actually had an episode where I treated on this topic briefly as well and kind of expanded out Percy Stevenson and Lady Chatterley's Lover. I can't remember which episode of UnSpun that was, but watch them all. So, Ewan Bloch, MD, also known as Eugene Duren, which is a pseudonym, is the man who supposedly discovered the Marquis de Sade's manuscript of the 100 Days of Sodom. This manuscript was believed lost. Now, are there any other books by Ewan Bloch, you ask? Why, of course. Ethnological and Cultural Studies of Sex Life in England Illustrated, privately issued by subscription to cultured adults only in 1934.
Let me guess, was it published by Gallant?
There wasn't actually a publisher tag on the book that I was looking at on there, so I couldn't really figure it out. It's private, so.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't that be funny if it was another left book club Gallant's publication, though? I mean, it's all... no doubt it's not far from there.
Yeah, I just kind of just skimmed over it because there's so much other detail I needed to cover for this episode. But like I said, there's an episode that we've done on this, and when I get back to it, I'll put the due diligence into this information.
All right, so let's dig into the deep, good stuff here.
Well, 1934, I just wanted to say something really quick about that book, because 1934 is an interesting date because British mass observation and weaponized anthropologist Thomas Harrison released Savage Civilization in 1937, I believe.
You mean he savaged civilization?
He savaged civilization. Well, he
yes. Well, that's probably never been used on him before. He savaged civilization. That's a really good pun on the pun.
Yeah, that's a good one right there.
That's really punny.
I'm gonna put that one in the toolbox. So he also wrote The Sexual Life of Our Time and Its Relations to Modern Civilization in 1909. Ewan Bloch is an ethnologist, an anthropologist, and a founder of Sexology. Now, we could look at the legacy of Ewan Bloch, and it says...
Wait. Before you go, are we going to find that he's related with or tied in some way to Wilhelm Reich and... what the heck was his name? Hold on. Now I have to pull it up in my database.
Wilhelm Reich. Kinsey? You have to think about Kinsey?
Well, no, not Kinsey. The other one. Oh, Bronislaw Malinowski, right?
Oh, yeah, I haven't checked that part yet.
Because Malinowski does the Sexual Life of Savages, right? That then Wilhelm Reich, studying under him, working for who knows what intel agency, publishes, his whole orgone theory and all the, creates the sexual revolution, and then he's working along. They're both, sorry, folks, here, I'll just put it here. There's Bronislaw Malinowski. And so here's Wilhelm Reich, and he publishes Sexual Revolution, or he starts all of that and creates this whole thing around it. But he's under Bronislaw Malinowski. Now, Margaret Mead was also working with him. She goes on to help start the sexual revolution as well, and polyamory and free love. But what's important about her, and the reason why I'm bringing all of this up in relation to Malinowski and these people, because there probably is a tie here. You don't usually get more than a step or two away, but
well, Margaret Mead edited a book where she includes the essays of Malinowski and Thomas Harrison.
What was the book's name? I probably have it listed here, but the reason why she's important is because she was the wife of Gregory Bateson, and of course Gregory Bateson over here helped to found the CIA and was a key person behind the CIA's MKUltra program.
Yes, indeed, and we'll be talking on some of these names. I can't find the book, otherwise I'd give you the name of it. We'll talk. We could do another episode on that.
It may already be listed in the brain, but or maybe we can get yours up there and going sometime soon as well. Sorry, go ahead though.
Okay, so now we're talking about Ewan Bloch and his sexology books. Now, there's a legacy quote in Wikipedia under his profile, and it says, according to Sigmund Freud, we just talked about Freud's granddaughter or great-granddaughter, just up there briefly. According to Sigmund Freud, Bloch's studies were instrumental in the development of the anthropological approach to the theory of sexuality. Before Bloch, homosexuality was analyzed using a pathological approach. There's a citation there that says 3. I decided to click on that and find the book and read what Sigmund Freud actually said, because this isn't a quote, it's a paraphrase. And this is what Sigmund Freud wrote in his 3 essays on the theory of sexuality in regards to Ewan Bloch. There's a little parentheses with an A in it, just kind of delineate his ideas, I believe. It says, it must be considered that inversion, also known as homosexuality, was a frequent manifestation among the ancient nations at the height of their culture. It was an institution endowed with important functions. B, it is found to be unusually prevalent among savages and primitive races, whereas the term degeneration is generally limited to higher civilization. Ewan Bloch. Even among the most civilized nations of Europe, climate and race have a most powerful influence on the distribution of and attitude towards inversion. That's Sigmund Freud, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, 1905.
We don't need to give that much detail, or we should just show it on the screen. But that's really interesting, the term inversion that they're using, because what we constantly see in all of this Kabbalistic magic and all that they use is inversion everywhere, all the time.
And that's exactly what we're seeing right here.
So yeah, let's keep going. We're barely into this, and we've got a long ways to go here, so you're going to have to move a lot faster.
So Freud also cites the Fabian sexologist Havelock Ellis quite a bit within this essay. He is a member of the group responsible for the founding of the Fabian Society, the Fellowship of the New Life. He is a member of the British Eugenics Society and an alumni of King's College London, where Adolphus Bernays, Louis Adolphus Bernays, and Dr. Humphrey Fortescue Osmond all attended. Sir Julian Sorel Huxley, Fellow of the Royal Society, is also a member of the British Eugenics Society. Now, as the study in Scaliger has already demonstrated, Jacob Bernays is the author of the only modern biography of Joseph Justus Scaliger, which at this time I've only been able to find in German. Jacob Bernays is grandfather to the founder of modern propaganda, Edward Bernays. Adolphus Bernays is Edward's great-grandfather, while Louis Adolphus Bernays is his great-uncle. Edward Bernays is the double nephew of Sigmund Freud and frequently cites his research. Now, returning to Alistair Hamilton, who writes the preface to the Scaliger collection. His career. After working at the International Cultural Center in Tunis and as a publisher and translator in New York City and Berlin, he was appointed to lecturer in English literature at the University of Urbino in Italy in 1977. Having specialized in the study of radical Reformation and Western relations with the Arab world, he became the Dr. C. Louis Disjen-Schout Professor of the History of Ideas at the University of Leiden in Holland in 1985, which is where...
Now, do you mind if I show the notes on screen while you're going through some of this?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so keep going there.
I'll help everybody read along with me with the show too.
Yeah, and just try to skim through it, because there's just too much detail there, and people can see some of it on the screen. So
Okay,
they
the most
follow
important
up.
things about this are that he was a Arcadian visiting research professor at the School of Advanced Study, London University, which is attached to the Warburg Institute, and that is what you think it is, the Warburg banking dynasty. In 2004, he was elected a corresponding fellow of the British Academy and has been a full fellow since 2013 when he settled in London. Now, isn't that kind of curious? We're finding a British Academy guy, and he's a student of Scaliger. So there's some principal publications there, but I didn't really find anything that I can really talk about, so I'll pass on that. Hank Jan de Jong. I haven't really been able to find much about this man because most of it is in Dutch. Most of his information is in Dutch, but he is emeritus professor of New Testament and early Christian literature at Leiden University. Now, he works with A.T. Grafton. H.J. de Jong and A.T. Grafton work together. Now, Anthony Thomas Grafton is one of the foremost historians of early modern Europe and the current Henry Putnam University professor at Princeton University. He is also a corresponding fellow of the British Academy and a recipient of the Balzan Prize. From January 2011 to January 2012, he served as the president of the American Historical Society. Now, Grafton was born in New Haven, Connecticut. He was educated at Phillips Academy, also known as Andover, which was founded by Samuel Phillips Jr., a strict Calvinist and chartered member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Now, Phillips Academy is an interesting school. In popular culture, Andover, often linked with Exeter, is often understood symbolically as an elite New England prep school, connoting privilege. Writer William S. Dietrich II described Andover and other elite prep schools as being part of a WASP ascendancy during the first half of the 20th century. Now, elite universities such as Yale and Princeton tended to accept disproportionate percentages of prep school students while using quotas to deny admission to minority applicants. An account in Time in 1931 described the two schools as having flourished, and that both schools were two giants of prep schools in size and in prestige. Essentially, feeder schools for Ivy League universities such as Harvard and Yale, according to Joseph Lieberman. Let's see here. I'll just kind of scroll down a little bit here. A cultural image from the 1960s was young men who had perfect white teeth and wore Lacoste shirts with a look easy to identify by young women at the time. Quote, "They can tell just by looking at him whether a boy goes to an Eastern prep school or not. Not only that, they can tell which prep school, usually St. Paul's or Hotchkiss or Groton or Exeter or Andover or whatever, just by checking his hair and his clothes." That's by Tom Wolfe in his book, Mauve, Gloves, and Madmen, Clutter and Vine. Now, as Jan can tell you, Tom Wolfe authored the electric Kool-Aid acid test. Boom. A highly experimental account of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. You might remember him from the psychedelic 60s and CIA.
You might remember the CIA's MKULTRA program, the Merry Pranksters. And, of course, what I was discussing earlier from Spies in Academic Clothing was how the CIA, to take control of the narrative, they wrote, I mean, think of it this way. You know, we would probably, most of us partied, smoked some weed on a hippie Volkswagen bus at some point in high school or college or whatever, and did some drugs, but how many of us went off and wrote books about that? Now, think about the coincidence of a whole bus full of people going off and doing that, you know, and it's like, you know, the Merry Pranksters were just another cell, you know, another intelligence cell, and Thomas Wolfe was one of the members, one of the Merry Pranksters, and he wrote this to control the official narrative and to tell, you know, to glorify the CIA's, you know, oral diarrhea, I guess, would be a good way to put it. So you know what, just for people to get an idea, if people want to read more, I have wanted to mention this for the last week and I keep forgetting. Thank you to Clint Richardson for sending me this huge, thick thing. This is his new book, which also goes into the history of, you know, the Bible as natural law and understanding how they brought us into contract and used all these tricks of logic. And the Bible really isn't about religion. The religion was part of the trick. It was the idea was to create the religion to get us out of natural law, which, I interviewed Clint a couple months ago with you, Jacob, discussing the Bible as natural law and not religion. So this is finally out, folks. I'm not even sure. You probably can't even get it on Amazon, but
No. Nope.
Yeah, where do you get it? Do you know?
Go to strawmanstory.info. I believe that's the website to go to, and you can get the PDF for free, or you can send Clint a donation and
get it mailed.
You'll get a gift for a gift.
Right. So anyway, I should have found out the address from Clint, but this really covers the idea that we're talking about in depth here, so that people can start to get a grasp. When you put together the history of Tartary from Fomenko and from Allegro and from Clint's perspective on natural law and the Bible, things really start coming together, and a lot of contradictions in the official history, in the official historical narrative, begin to fall out. And of course, a contradiction is always a lie or an error. So, go ahead.
I'll just add. I recommend going to corporationnationradioarchives.wordpress.com.
Somebody says strawmanstory.info. Does that sound right?
That's correct. Yeah. If you go to that website I just mentioned, you'll find the audio archives of all of Clint's interviews and his radio show. And inside that website is a spreadsheet which detail the info on each episode. So if you want to study what Clint is talking about in his book and you want to get more information on it and go deep, go to the website.
See, what Clint also explains is that the concept of God was never a noun. It was a verb of everything that ever was, is, or could be. And somehow this was misconstrued into and personified, essentially, and taken away from the, allegory and the explanation of natural law that it was intended to be for suppression. Anyway, we have a lot more to get through, so we better.
We're only on page 7 of 34.
Yeah. So and you have 18 minutes, so go.
So the WASP ascendancy began. We're talking about Andover. The WASP ascendancy began to break down around the 1960s and onwards with the mission policies of elite prep schools. Yada yada yada. The school is often mentioned in books and film and on television. Some examples include in chapter 17 of The Catcher in the Rye, which we mentioned earlier, in which Jan and Joe have treated on quite a good depth. The appearance of it is Sally Hayes introduces Holden to a boy who attended Andover. Quote, "You'd have thought they've taken baths in the same bathtub or something when they were little kids. Old buddy ruse. It was nauseating. The funny part was they probably met each other just once at some phony party. Finally, when they were all done slobbering around, old Sally introduced us. His name was George something. I don't even remember. He went to Andover. Big deal." Anything you want to add on Catcher in the Rye?
No, I'm not an expert on that. I mean, it's apparently promoting more pedophilia.
That seemed kind of pretty telling. Now, I could go down a little bit further and talk about the appearance of Andover and A Beautiful Mind and John Nash, but it's kind of a loose one. It's John Nash's imaginary Princeton roommate characterizes him as a poor kid that never got to go to Exeter or Andover. And it's just kind of interesting that Andover would kind of make it a point to mention it for something that's just a little passing in a film. I went to Miles Mathis's website, and I pulled up a really interesting passage connecting Nash to Ted Kaczynski and the CIA. We don't necessarily have to break down with this. I mean, it's a little bit, over a page of notes on it.
Yeah, it's milesmathis.com/nash.pdf. I've got it there on the screen for those who want to read it. But basically, he argues that the Ted Kaczynski Unabomber thing was a misdirection. That is quite possible, because we have to remember that Kaczynski was out of the Harvard Social Relations Department, along with everybody else out of the CIA who was in that department. Thomas Chew, B.F. Skinner, Tim Leary, Michael Hollingshead, Dick Price, that went on to found the Esalen Institute with Michael Murphy. James Fadiman was in there. I mean, Nora Maccabee's dad was in there. You have basically the whole, the Harvard Social Relations Department was just about a second CIA. It was that much a core part of CIA operations. But, it's really hard to say how much about Kaczynski is misdirection. I did try to write Dr. Kaczynski about maybe 10 months or a year ago. I never got a response from him, unfortunately. But, so it's hard to say at this point.
You mentioned Harvard Social Relations, and Andover, as I mentioned earlier, was a feeder school to Harvard and Yale, which is known as schools that pump out agents. So
right, and and just because we don't want to say that all people that go to Yale or Harvard are agents. I mean, somebody did discover black geese in Australia. When everybody was saying that geese were white, so. We want to just put that caveat in there that just because somebody went to Harvard or Yale doesn't necessarily mean that they're an agent. It's just an extremely high probability.
Well, now you could look at it a different way. Well, if you're an organization that wants to try to find agents, you're trying to go to the best schools that are around there with the top minds. And generally the ones that are accepting those top minds are Harvard and Yale. And if you're going to, it's just basically a nice grocery store where you can find a mine and pluck it out and control it for the rest of its life.
Yeah, and then send it on down the conveyor belt so that it acts like every other jarhead that thinks it's independent. All right.
So, what I have here now is the sigil of Phillips Academy on my screen. Do you want me to share a screen, or do you want to share a screen showing that?
All right, just go ahead. I've got the sigil up there, so people can see it. Just go ahead and talk, I guess.
All right, so note the beehive symbolism. I mean, that's what we're going to be focusing on, is the beehive. Now, I've seen this before. It is on the coat of arms of the Gallant family, depicted on the cover of Personalia relating to Rabbi Sir Hermann Gallant. Now, my research started with the Left Book Club and Brigadier General Thomas Harrison, who was published under Sir Victor Gallant. Now, Sir Victor Gallant...
Now, that's going back, of course, to the first show that you did with Joe and I. I definitely recommend people watch that. I mean, you'll get a deep understanding on quite a few levels from that episode.
Yeah. So Victor is the nephew of Rabbi Sir Hermann Gallant, and as well as Sir Israel Gallant. Now, Sir Israel Gallant is the founder of the British Academy, and he's also the founder, through the British Academy, of the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem. Now, if I scroll down and I look at the next picture that I have here, this is from the cover of Personalia by Rabbi Sir Hermann Gallant. And you also notice that there is, again, a beehive. I will treat the coat of arms in much more detail on an episode that's dedicated to the Gallant family. But for now, we'll just treat the beehive and the inscription below it, Labor Omnia Vincent.
It's a good thing I have a face perfect for radio, so I can just put this stuff right up over me.
So Labor Omnia Vincent means work conquers all. And when I studied the Gallant family, those men are diligent, hard workers. That doesn't mean they're hard workers for the good of all mankind. It just means that they're really hard workers. Now, what is the symbolism of the beehive in respect to Freemasonry? I'm going to read some definitions here from Mackey's, let's see, what is it called? It's Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry.
That's this big sucker right here, volume 1.
And I also included an image from the website that had the quotes put on it. It was a MasonicDictionary.com, I think was the name of it. It's blanking off the top of my head. So the beehive, it's kind of important to read this passage.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, just go ahead and dig in.
In our 20th century America, the word industry denotes manufacturing and factories classified as heavy industry and light industry, and connote machines and factory workers. When the beehive is said to be an emblem of industry, the word is not used in that sense. Indeed, is used with an almost opposite meaning, for it is used in the sense of centuries ago, which was the true sense. Industry was the employment of a very large number of men, tens of thousands in many instances, on one understanding, at one place, and at the same time, and they might or might not use machinery. It was the method by which, in the ages before heavy machinery, vast building enterprises were accomplished, some of which have so long mystified modern men: the building of the pyramids, of the ancient Egyptian canals, of the hanging gardens of Babylon, of the ziggurats, of vast Hindu temples, of the Chinese Great Wall and Grand Canal of the Maya city of Chichen Itza, etc. The same method by which in World War II, the Burma, which is, I believe, no, it was Borneo. I'm sorry, I'm keep going. Burma and Leda roads were constructed, as well as the great airfields in the remote hills of China. I'm just thinking of Thomas Harrison when he was in Borneo, and they manufactured a makeshift landing strip with the people using, I think it was
bamboo.
Bamboo, yeah, it's bamboo. So it's pretty neat. And the method by which from Caesar's time until modern times, the Dutch have built their hundreds of miles of dikes. The beehive is the perfect emblem or typical instance of the power of industry, because what no one bee or a succession of separate bees could accomplish is easy where hundreds of them work together at one task at one time. The medieval Freemasons did not study and think about the same subjects that architects and builders now accept in fundamentals, did not secure the elements of a building ready-made from factories, had no steam or electric or magnetic tools to use. Chemistry and physics were forbidden sciences and could be studied by the initiate only in secret or under a heavy camouflage of symbolism. They had two great subjects: materials and men. A modern architect knows far more about materials than the medieval builder because he has universities, literature, laboratories, and factories to draw on. But he knows far less about men. Indeed, he knows almost nothing about men. Where a modern builder looks to machines as the means to accomplish his results, the medieval builder, who had no power-driven machines, had to look to men. For this reason, the medieval builder knew far more about work than his modern counterpart, because work is nothing other than a man making use of himself as a means to get something made or produced or accomplished. Where a modern foreman thinks of himself as a supervisor of a building full of machines, the medieval foreman thought of himself as a master of workmen. By the same token, a workman had to know himself instead of a machine, because he was his own machine. Skill is the expert use of one's self. It was for such reasons that medieval Freemasons thought much about and had a wide knowledge of the forms of work. There are some 52 of these. Industry itself is one of them, the most massive and most dramatic, but not the most important. Where a man makes everything by himself, from the raw materials to the finished product, is another. Where a number of men work in a line at the same bench, and where the first does one thing to the job, kind of like a stab, the second does another, and so on until the job is completed by the last man, so that it is the job and not the men who move, is another form of work. Where one man completes one thing, another perhaps in another place completes another, and so on, and where finally a man combines a number of completed things to make one thing, is another form of work, etc., etc. The general organization of a lodge is based on the principles of forms of work. So are the stations and places of officers. Though as an emblem of the form of work called industry, the beehive symbolizes only one in particular. It at the same time represents the system of forms of work, is as it were an ensemble of them. And from it, a sufficiently well-informed thinker could think out of the system of Masonic philosophy. In our craft, the whole of fraternalism is nothing other than the fellowship required by the forms of work, because the majority of them require men to work together in association, in stations and places, and therefore in cooperation. It is strange that in its present day stage of development, the so-called science of economics should concern itself solely with such subjects as wages, machines, money, transportation, because they are but incidentals and accidentals. Work is a topic proper to economics, and the forms of work are its proper subject matter. Any scholar or thinker who chances to be a Mason could find in his own fraternity a starting point for a new economics, as fresh and revolutionary and revealing as was the work of Copernicus in astronomy, of Newton in physics, of Darwin in biology. A beehive itself is a trifle, and scarcely worth 10 minutes of thought. What it stands for is one of the largest and most important subjects in the world, and up until now, one of the least understood. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry.
So hopefully the audience really, takes that in and thinks about that quote, because they're using the beehive, and you see the beehive, in ancient architecture. You see it all over Las Vegas and the buildings there, and they just kind of put it right in your faces as they give you entertainment. Clint and I have discussed the meaning of those words in the past, but it's all to control the hive and distract the hive, creating the hive mind. I guess we should really focus on calling it the hive mind rather than the herd mind. While the cattle plays, it's really the hive mind. And when you understand the drones and the worker bees and the queen and everything, this is really how they're structuring society and how they're killing off a huge segment of the society right now.
Yeah, and actually, some of the treatments on the beehive that I have continuing kind of go into what you just discussed. I don't know if you think we have time, I can read into these a little bit more.
Sure, you can go into it a little bit. Let's try to speed through it a little bit, though. We're at almost at 1 hour now, so I'm not sure, how long. As you can see, folks, we're not even halfway yet. So, I told Jacob that. That many pages was going to be too much. He thought he could pull it off, but we'll be here till midnight, I think.
Well, what we could do is we'll skip over the second beehive. This one's pretty easy to find.
Well, it's on screen, so ladies and gentlemen, you can just
pause.
Read it there. Pause and read it. So there you go. It's right there.
Okay,
go ahead.
We could do that if you want. We just say pause and read for the next couple of things here.
Let's just do that and move on.
So I'm going to scroll. Well, we'll scroll down to Fraternal Society.
Obviously, that makes this much more of a video version than an audio for those of you who want the audio-only version.
Just the in-depth stuff. Just going into some definitions, especially out of Encyclopedia Judaica on Freemasons and stuff.
All right, so let's go.
Okay, so where are you right now on your sheet? Because I can't follow along with what you're showing.
Well, we were just showing the second beehive.
Okay.
Source: the bee was among the Egyptians the symbol of an obedient people because says blah blah blah. So
yeah,
anyway.
So we'll continue on. What I think we'll do is we'll just go down to the allegory of the bee maybe, and just kind of treat that really briefly.
Do you want to skip over the fraternal societies and Freemason citations there?
Yeah,
again, ladies and gentlemen, pause. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen. Pause. Look at that. And Elders of Zion. That's a pretty good one. We probably shouldn't skip that.
Okay, we'll do that one if you want. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So did you want to say something first before?
No, you go ahead, and then I'll interject into it.
So I'm going to read this passage off of here. It's just an opening paragraph from the Encyclopedia Judaica, 2nd edition. It's Elders of Zion, Protocols of the Learned. Anti-Semitic forgery aimed at showing the existence of international Jewish aspirations bent on world power. The specter of a worldwide Jewish conspiracy aiming at reducing the Gentiles to slavery or exterminating them loomed up in the Christian imagination during the Middle Ages, growing out of legends of well poisoning and plague spreading. Some such stories claimed that a secret rabbinical conference had been held to work out a detailed plan for ritual genocide of the Christians. From the time of the Renaissance, at first in Spain, these legends turned on a political plot rather than a religious one. Similar notions circulated in France and Germany after Napoleon's convocation of the Great Sanhedrin, see French Sanhedrin, in 1807. They did not gain widespread popular credence, nor at first did the versions launched during the second half of the century by French Catholic authors like Borel and Bailey, who associated Freemasons and Jews in an anti-Christian plot. In its latest version, the legend of the Elders of Zion was concocted in Paris in the last decade of the 19th century by an unknown author working for the Russian secret police, which is quite fascinating. A known unknown. How could you know?
A known unknown, yes.
Yeah. We don't know who this author is.
That's like a Donald Rumsfeld thing, known unknowns. How about that?
This guy we don't know worked for this organization we know. This wasn't
all
written.
right. Yeah, go ahead and finish that.
In all probability, it was intended to influence the policy of Tsar Nicholas II towards the interests of the secret police. And we all know what happened to Tsar Nicholas.
Yeah. Now, I should point out that there was a pretty well-known, I'll just, for shits and giggles sake, call him a scholar who in 1921, he published an article in the New York Times that I had tried to track down. Of course, and this was maybe 5-6 years ago, I tried to track down the original debunking and showing that the Protocols of Zion was a quote-unquote forgery. And now that's an interesting word when we look up forgery, the action or craft of forging metal, a piece of forged work. It usually means something that's a forgery is usually a fake copy of an original. It does, and which, like you were saying earlier, anything that's translated is therefore a forgery. But, there is one citation in the OED here that says the making of a thing in fraudulent imitation of something, also especially forging, counterfeiting, falsifying a document. So these are all, and then one of them, number 2, does say fictitious invention. But this is, it being a fictitious invention is usually not the common understanding of the word forgery. Now, the scholar that published this piece in I believe it was the New York Times that I could not track down the original of. That page was mysteriously deleted from the online version of the paper on the New York Times website. But it was a guy, you may have heard of him, Jacob, Alan Dulles.
Yeah, he's Thomas Harrison's buddy.
Thomas Harris, yeah. So Alan, and then for those of you who don't know, who don't get my facetiousness here, Aldous Huxley, of course, was the first DCI director of Central Intelligence.
I don't have I found a letter. Was it the second Thomas Harrison episode, which showed that Alan Dulles was in contact with agents working with Thomas Harrison and what was the name of the Sarawak Museum? Yeah, so we're seeing agent connections all over the place here.
It's always the agent circle jerk, you know.
Yeah, you're mentioning a lot. Yeah.
When you get into checking primary citations, you all too often find intelligence cells, and this is how you actually know that you're looking at intelligence cells, as you see this constant circle jerk of citations going on, and then these cells will start citing other cells to prop each other up. But that's when you know you've landed in a intelligence cell jackpot, and you just traverse the lines, and you can, then expose the agents like like you're fishing in a thimble,
It's almost like it's almost like you're. I was thinking like a honey pot. Got beehives in my mind.
Yeah, thimble pot. Anyway,
yeah. So you mentioned Las Vegas seeing the beehives around. Mormonism and actually has a connection to Freemasonry, and they're just next door in Utah. And the relationship between Mormonism and Freemasonry began in the early life of Joseph Smith, who was the founder of the Latter-day Saints movement, as his older brother Hiram and possibly his father were Freemasons while the family lived near Palmyra, New York. Nevertheless, in the late 1820s, the Western New York region was swept with anti-Masonic fervor. By the 1840s, however, Smith and several prominent Latter-day Saints had become Freemasons and founded a lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois in March 1842. Soon after joining Freemasonry, Smith introduced a temple endowment ceremony, including a number of symbolic elements that were very similar to those in Freemasonry. Smith remained a Freemason until his death. However, later leaders in the movement have distanced themselves from Freemasonry. In modern times, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, the predominant Latter-day Saints sect, holds no position for or against the compatibility of Masonry with LDS Church doctrine. Now, below this, I have an allegory by a Freemason.
Yeah, I'll show it on screen here.
And the image is also courtesy of the website where I got this from.
Now, that's is that the beehive? Wait, which one are we at here? Let me find. I'm lost. What page are you on?
Page 16, just below Mormonism.
Okay, so I was on the right page. All right.
Yep. Yeah. So this is an allegory by a Freemason on the beehive, which will be a little bit different, but also quite illuminating. probably should be treated just because Jan kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. Many Freemasons wonder what the significance of the Masonic beehive is to their craft. Let's take a look at it. Queen bees develop from larvae, which is selected by the worker bees. She is specially fed royal jelly so that she becomes larger and therefore can produce and retain a greater number of worker bees during her lifetime for the benefit of the hive. Without being chosen by her brethren to become the queen bee, she would grow up to become a worker bee, just like all the rest. While she is continuously surrounded by worker bees who meet her every need, her sole function is to serve as a reproducer of her species. During her life as the queen bee, she will usually only leave the hive once, and that is to reproduce. From this one-time outing, she'll be able to lay eggs for the rest of her life, which is approximately 2 to 7 years. A well-functioning lodge, I mean hive, consists of one queen bee, master of the lodge, many worker bees, and a few drones. A well-functioning beehive is a very busy place indeed, industry being each bee's highest virtue, as we explained earlier, with the exception of drones. Drones are larger than the worker bees. However, they do absolutely nothing to promote the welfare of the hive. They do not gather nectar, make honey, or make beeswax. They do not cap off each cell of honey that has been stored, nor do they fan the cell to dry the beeswax. They also do not perform any housekeeping tasks toward the common good of their fraternity, nor do they educate the younger bees in how to perform the work. Needless to say, the drones do not worry about having enough honey stored to take the fraternity through the long winter. The worker bees must feed the drones, or the drones would starve and die. The only reason the drones are kept alive by the worker bees is to promote the reproduction within the hive. As you can see, the hive needs very few drones if it is to function properly. If too many drones have been produced by the queen bee, their excess numbers drag down the abilities of the entire hive because each working member has to attempt to care for and feed these non-working members of their fraternity without receiving anything in return. In the bee world, their excess numbers are internally counted, and when the drones' numbers exceed their usefulness, the worker bees drag these non-working members of their institution to the front door of the hive, where they are left alone to perish, not because they feel no charity, but simply because for their fraternity to survive, they cannot continue to nourish and support non-working members. Therefore, worker bees understand that they must elect the strongest of the larvae to become their queen or lodge master. If they do not continue to help the queen or lodge master reproduce offspring, they will die. If each worker bee does not work in unison with the other members of the fraternity to feed, nurture, and retain each other, every other worker bee member of their institution, their industrious fraternity, will die. Freemasonry is full of allegory. Allegory means that you are representing one thing when you're actually alluding to another thing. It is a literary style, which means you teach by innuendo. Most allegories include a moral of the story. The story of the beehive above is an allegory. The last paragraph beginning with, therefore, worker bees understand that, contains the moral of the story. Thus was man formed for social and active life, the noblest part of the work of God, and he that will so demean himself as not to be endeavoring to add to the common stock of knowledge and understanding, may be deemed a drone in the hive of nature, a useless member of society, and unworthy of our protection as Freemasons. That's by Carl H. Cloudy, the Master's book, which is published by the Temple Publishers, which is owned by a Grandmaster.
And you can see exactly what they're doing right now. They're killing off all of the drones in society, you know.
There's a mass production of them, that's for sure.
Well, they're killing off one group and producing another even yet dumber group, apparently.
Some even more worthless drones. So keep that temple in mind.
Aldous Huxley's Epsilons, you know.
Oh, jeez. Oh, that's a good poem.
Thanks.
In a bad way. In a bad way.
And thanks to Chris Mayville for the really popular introductory song.
Yeah, that's really good.
All right, so
I,
we're about halfway done through your notes here. Do you want to continue on, or what do you want to do here?
I mean, I can if you can. We that temple right there is almost like a tipping point to another divergence down into.
All right, well, let's just
Maybe.
dig in, maybe skip over Rudyard Kipling or whatever, and just try to hit the more important parts, or is that
Well, I think this is actually kind of important.
all right?
This,
All
this,
right,
this,
let's just hit it.
all right. So a curious note is Professor Sir Israel Gallant, who I just mentioned and I've been talking about. It was the editor of the Temple Shakespeare through the publisher J.M. Dent and Company. Now, the word temple holds special meaning, especially in Freemasonic terms, as we heard above. Now, there's a book that I picked up at Half Price Books in the rare book section a while ago. It's called The Builders. And I was looking in the index, seeing if there's any interesting nouns in there that I should look up inside of the book. And I looked up Dionysus. And it just turns out that there's an interesting passage in this book about Dionysian artificers. Now, Dionysian artificers in the buildings and the significance of the temple. Now, there's a quote before chapter 5 of the Ecclesia in this book, and it goes as follows. The society was called the Dionysian artificers, as Bacchus was supposed to be the inventor of building theaters, and they performed Dionysian festivities. From this period, the science of astronomy, which had given rise to the Dionysian rites, became connected with types taken from the art of building. The Ionian societies extended their moral views in conjunction with the art of building to many useful purposes and to the practice of acts of benevolence. They had significant words to distinguish their members, and for the same purpose, they used emblems taken from the art of building. That's Joseph da Costa, Dionysian Artificers, and it's quoted in The Builders, a story and study of masonry. I must state that Professor Sir Israel Gallant is a founding member of the committee for a Shakespeare Memorial Theatre, which eventually becomes the Royal National Theatre in London. It's just kind of interesting that this family beehive symbolism in their coat of arms, work conquers all, has a lot of Freemasonic connotations, and that Israel Gallant is the editor-in-chief of J.M. Dent's Temple Shakespeare, which also produces the Temple Classics, which is a means of popularizing a lot of the classic literature of ancient history and Shakespearean literature to the common household by releasing them in small pocketbook form.
Right.
So the popularization of the classics in Shakespeare goes through Sir Israel Gallant and J.M. Dent, and we all know about these publishing circles. I could read this quote from Rudyard Kipling, but he's just actually, I should, because there's a name at the bottom of this you're going to want to see. So there's a quote on the title page of The Builders.
Well, I can just show it on screen if you want.
Yeah, well, Rudyard Kipling essentially went to the same school. It's called East India Company College, but it was combined with United Services College and Imperial Services College. And there's some noted people that went to the school. Freemason Rudyard Kipling, Academy Award-winning film director Christopher Nolan, Frank Podmore, a founder of the Fabian Society, and Dr. Humphrey Fortescue Osmond of MKUltra fame. I just needed to include that in there because that's
and of course Humphrey Osmond was Aldous Huxley's personal doctor, and who got Aldous Huxley the mescaline to write Doors of Perception that kicked off their publicizing psychedelics to the public for MKUltra. Okay, so anyway, this quote from Kipling: "When I was a king and a mason, a master proved and skilled, I cleared me ground for a palace, such as a king should build. I decreed and cut down to my levels. Presently under the silt, I came on the wreck of a palace, such as a king had built."
Buried history, huh?
Yeah, I mean, talking about building up and destroying society itself, right? They all engineer the whole society itself, build it and collapse it, build it and collapse it,
and just keep taking that honey. Okay, so
and if the honey is from certain plants, it's psychedelic or poisonous honey. That's another thing is depending on what plants the bees get the pollen from, it will be psychedelic and or poisonous honey. In fact, there's stories of entire platoons of Russian or of Roman slip there of Roman troops getting wiped out because they were high on some honey.
Wow. Now, I could go into the builders and treat more on Dionysian artificers if you'd like, because that does tie into Bacchus and a lot of the ancient.
All right, let's just go through it quickly. So, rather than talk about covering it, let's just get through it.
All right, let's do it. So we need the following passage on Dionysian artificers. This is another one that goes before the chapter. It says, we need not consider it improbably if in the dark centuries when the Roman Empire was dying out and its glorious temples falling into ruin, when the arts and sciences were falling into disuse or being enslaved, and when no place was safe from persecution and warfare, the guild of the architects should fly for safety to almost the only free spot in Italy. And here, though they could no longer practice their craft, they preserved the legendary knowledge and precepts which, as history implies, came down to them through Vitruvius from older sources, some say from Solomon's builders themselves. That's Leader Scott and the cathedral builders. I'd like to read some passages on Dionysus from the builders. This is chapter 5, the Collegia. So far in our study, we have found that from earliest time, architecture was related to religion, that the working tools of the builder were emblems of moral truth, that there were great secret orders using the drama of faith as a rite of initiation, and that a hidden doctrine was kept for those accounted worthy after trial to be entrusted with it. Secret societies, born of the nature and need of man, there have been almost since recorded history began. But as yet we have come upon no separate and distinct order of builders. For aught we know, there may have been such in plenty, but we have no intimation, much less a record of the fact. That is to say, history has a vague story to tell us of the earliest orders of the builders. However, it is more than a mere plausible inference that from the beginning architects were members of secret orders. And, as we have seen, not only the truths of religion and philosophy, but also the facts of science and the laws of art were held as secrets to be known only to the few. This was so apparently without exception among all ancient peoples. So much so, indeed, that we may take it as certain that the builders of old time were initiates. Of necessity, then, the arts of the crafts were secrets jealously guarded, and the architects themselves, while they may have employed and trained ordinary workmen, were men of learning and influence. Such glimpses of early architects, as we have confirmed this inference, as, for example, the noble hymn to the sun god written by Suti and Hor, two architects employed by Amenhotep III of Egypt. Just when the builders began to form orders of their own, no one knows, but it was perhaps when the mystery cults began to journey abroad into other lands. What we have to keep in mind is that all the arts had their home in the temple, from which, as time passed, they spread out fan-wise along all paths of culture. Keeping in mind the secrecy of the laws of building and the sanctity with which all science and art were regarded, we have a key whereby to interpret the legends woven about the building of the Temple of Solomon. Few realize how high the temple on Mount Moriah towered in the history of the olden world, and how the story of its building haunted the legends and traditions of the times following. Of these legends there were many, some of them wildly improbable, but the persistence of the tradition and its consistency withal, despite many variations, is a fact of no small moment. Nor is this tradition to be wondered at, since time has shown that the building of the temple at Jerusalem was an event of world importance, not only to the Hebrews, but to other nations, more especially the Phoenicians. The histories of both peoples make much of the building of the Hebrew temple, of the friendship of Solomon and Hiram I of Tyre, and of the harmony between the two peoples. And Phoenician tradition has it that Solomon presented Hiram with a duplicate of the temple, which was erected in Tyre. It kind of treats on, they didn't kill everybody off and they built the temples, and, it wasn't that they killed off all the builders and they weren't totally secretive. I'm just going to kind of skip past here. Josephus adds that the architecture of the temple was a style called Grecian. So much would seem to be fact, whatever may be said of the legends flowing from it. If then the laws of building were secrets known only to initiates, there must have been a secret order of architects who built the Temple of Solomon. Who were they? They're almost certainly the Dionysian artificers, not to be confused with the play actors called by the same name later. An order of builders who erect temples, stadia, and theaters in Asia Minor, and who were at the same time an order of the mysteries under the tutelage of Bacchus. Before that, worship declined, as it did later in Athens and Rome, into mere revelry. As such, they united the art of architecture with the old Egyptian drama of faith, representing in their ceremonies the murder of Dionysius by the Titans and his return to life. So that blending the symbols of astronomy with those of architecture by a slight change made by a natural process, how easy for the master artist of the temple builders to become the hero of the ancient drama of immortality. Let's see, I think there's a little passage on Bacchus inside this footnote. I'm going to just double check really quick. Okay, so Of Masonry by Laurie, chapter 1, and Laurie in turn derived the facts from a sketch for the history of the Dionysian artificers, a fragment by H.J. da Costa in 1820. Why Waite and others brush the Dionysian architects aside as a dream is past finding out in view of the evidence and authorities put forth by da Costa, nor do they give any reason for doing. Lebedos was the seat and assembly of the Dionysian artificers, who inhabit Ionia to the Hellespont. There they had annually their solemn meetings and festivities in honor of Bacchus.
Hey, your microphone cable is scraping your beard or shirt or something there, just so you know.
Kind of keep that away there. Okay, that's basically what I just want to talk about. So there's
something's still scraping it, dude.
How about now?
Definitely not now, thank you. It's been going for the last minute or two. So, all right, well, let's just skip ahead. We got a lot here to cover. So, if we're gonna try to wrap it up, we're gonna have to go a lot faster, dude. We're only, not even 2/3 through yet.
Okay, so you get the point. Dionysus is linked with the Freemasons and the hives, and we know that it extends over into the Gallant family. Now, J.M. Dent and Company are the publishers of the Temple Shakespeare and Temple Classics, and they're employer of Israel Gallants. Now, I possess a 12-volume set from 1913 of the Everyman Encyclopedia, which J.M. Dent publishes. There's a Scaliger biography in it, and it is poor. It reinforces their false claim to nobility, as well as Julius's false childhood history. Eventually, J.M. Dent and Company is purchased by Weidenfeld and Nicholson. Weidenfeld and Nicholson are famous for publishing the controversial novel Lolita, written by Vladimir Nabokov. And what's interesting about Vladimir Nabokov is he's born to a wealthy and prominent family of Russian nobility, which traces its roots back, to a 14th century Tatar prince, Nabok Mirza, who entered into the services of the Tsars and from which the family name is derived. Now, eventually, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit or not, or just keep moving.
Which I'm reading all the comments in the chat here, so this is pretty. So and thanks to Hamish Ferguson for donating $20 just now. I really appreciate that.
So I just said that J.M. Dent and Company was purchased by Weidenfeld and Nicholson, and they are popularized by controversially publishing Nabokov's Lolita. And what's interesting about Vladimir Nabokov is he's related to a 14th century Tatar prince, Nabok Mirza, who entered into the service of the Tsars and from which his family name is derived.
Watch your microphone there.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it away from me.
Yeah. We're going to need to get you... somebody donate... somebody donate Jacob a microphone. Get him a nice Shure... what is this? SM7B or something like that? I forget.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, SM7B. Michael Jackson's favorite.
I could go into George Weidenfeld quite a bit. I mean, maybe we could just do the whole show on these guys and their whole publishing circle. I'm just going to skip through here really quick, and because Weidenfeld and Nicholson are interesting because Nigel Nicholson, his partner, is the son of Sir Harold Nicholson and Vita Sackville West. And Vita Sackville West is famous for having a long-term affair with Virginia Woolf. And Sir Harold Nicholson is a Fabian Labor Party member who is friends with the British fascist Oswald Mosley. I could go into this forever. I mean, they're dirty. So, but I'll skip it for the sake of the show. There are other publications by J.M. Dent and the Everman Library. There's an author by the name of Theodore Mommsen.
Yeah, dude, I don't know if you can do something about that microphone hitting your beard, man.
Let me see. I have another. Let's see if this will work better. Let me switch. 1 second.
And he's blowing our eardrums. I'm just teasing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I do that wrong?
No, it's cool. You know what? Can you just use your microphone now? What? In fact, we'll just leave it out and you just use the computer mic. That's working fine right now.
Yeah, just let me know if any feedback loops or anything kind of come up.
I've got headphones on, so we should be okay. But I'll let you know. Don't have it too loud on your side. So go ahead.
Okay, so J.M. Denton and the Everman Library. I was just talking about how Israel Gallant was an employee, the editor of the Temple Shakespeare. They published a book, not the first editions, but just later on, they picked up Theodore Mommsen's History of Rome. Now, Theodore Mommsen is interesting because he is a friend of Jacob Bernays. Let's see here. Let me just kind of skim through here. And his work regarding Roman history is still of fundamental importance for contemporary research. He received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1902 for being the greatest living master of the art of historical writing, with special reference to his monumental work, A History of Rome. After having been nominated by 18 members of the Prussian Academy of Sciences, he was also a prominent German politician as a member of the Prussian and German parliaments. His work on Roman law and on the law of obligations had a significant impact on the German civil code. I'm going to skip ahead here. In 1854, Mommsen became a professor of law at the University of Breslau, where he met Jacob Bernays. Mommsen became a research professor at the Berlin Academy of Sciences in 1857. He later helped to create and manage the German Archaeological Institute in Rome. In 1858, Mommsen was appointed a member of the Academy of Sciences in Berlin, and he also became professor of Roman history at the University of Berlin in 1861, where he held lectures up to 1887. Mommsen received recognition for his academic achievements, for membership of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, the medal pour le mérite. Yeah.
Sorry, somebody's cracking a joke in the chat group. Go ahead.
Honorary citizenship of Rome. Elected a member of the American Antiquarian Society and the Nobel Prize in Literature for his work Römische Geschichte, which is Roman history. He's one of the very few nonfiction writers to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. This is where it gets interesting. So at 2 a.m. on the 7th of July, 1880, a fire occurred in the upper floor workroom library of Mommsen's house at Machstrasse 6 in Berlin. After being burned while attempting to remove valuable papers, he was restrained from returning to the blazing house. Several old manuscripts were burnt to ashes, including manuscript 0.4.36, which was on loan from the library of Trinity College, Cambridge. There is information that the important manuscript of Jordanes from Heidelberg University Library was burnt. 2 other important manuscripts from Brussels and Halle were also destroyed.
More of the infamous book burnings.
Yeah, he was an indefatigable worker. Interesting. Although I'm German, we're known for our work ethic. People often saw him reading whilst walking the streets. Now, Mommsen had 16 children, which kind of
in fact, you're even named after a German town, aren't you?
I am. Yeah, I looked it up. Duellman is D-U with an umlaut L-M-E-N, which is named after the Duellman ponies.
And they killed everyone in that town, right?
Yeah, in World War II, they bombed 90% of the area. So if I want to find family history, I'm kind of...
I guess now we know why they tried to kill you all. You were probably all trying to expose this stuff like me.
Maybe. I also like the Duellman as the dueling man, too, that interpretation. Defending my honor. Okay, so... Their oldest daughter, Maria, married Ulrich von Wilhelm. I'll just skip that. That's really difficult to pronounce. He's a great classics scholar. We'll just Ulrich von Willendorf. And I speak German. That's really difficult. Wow, that's a good one. Their grandson, Theodore Ernst Mommsen, became a professor of medieval history in the United States. 2 of his great-grandsons, Hans Mommsen and Wolfgang Mommsen, were prominent German historians. Mommsen published over 1,500 works. and effectively established a new framework for the systematic study of Roman history. 1,500 works and effectively established a new framework for the systematic study of Roman history. Just gotta repeat that.
A new framework. For the new manufactured Rome that came about in the late 13th, early 14th century, newly positioned in Italy, where before it was not.
What's kind of interesting about that Kipling quote is that Rome is built on top of Rome. That little poem you're talking about, he was building.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's right there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Rome, for those who don't know, was most likely previously in Constantinople.
Oh yeah. See flamenco. He pioneered epigraphy, the study of inscriptions and material artifacts. Although the unfinished history of Rome, written early in his career, has long been widely considered as his main work, the work most relevant today is perhaps the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarium, a collection of Roman inscriptions he contributed to the Berlin Academy.
What page are you on now?
I'm on page 24.
All right, so we've got a ways to fly here.
I'm just going to skip over his works. Basically,
I'm just going to show them on the screen here for the audience. So pause if you want to look those up. And anyway, I'm down to Mommsen as Politician on page 25 now. If you want to say anything about that.
Well, I'll just say his works are to treat on Roman chronology. So it's really important that I think Mommsen's important because he treats on Roman chronology and probably is responsible for trying to solidify in modern academia the dates that we now see. I haven't investigated that yet, but that's just something worth looking into. Now, Mommsen was a liberal nationalist. Let's see. Let me just scroll through here. Some of this might not be really important for what we're kind of talking about now. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's on screen. They can look it up. He was a fellow or influence of Mommsen, fellow Nobel laureate Bernard Shaw, which, of course, Fabian, the same group of people, same group of disgusting swine we're constantly exposing. But
and then it goes down to Mark Twain, a Freemason. And this one's interesting. I'll read this one really quick. One of the high points of Mark Twain's European tour in 1892 was a large formal banquet at the University of Berlin. Mark Twain was an honored guest, seated at the head table with some 20 particularly eminent professors. And it was from this vantage point that he witnessed the following incident. In Twain's own words, quote, "When apparently the last eminent guest had long ago taken his place, again those three bugle blasts rang out, and once more the swords leaped from their scabbards. Who might this latecomer be? Nobody was interested to inquire. Still, indolent eyes were turned toward the distant entrance, and we saw the silken gleam and the lifted sword of a guard of honor plowing through the remote crowds. Then we saw that at that end of the house rising to its feet, saw it rise abreast the advancing guard all along like a wave. This supreme honor had been offered to no one before. There was an excited whisper at our table, 'Mommsen!' And when the whole house rose and shouted and stamped and clapped and banged the beer bugs, just simply a storm. Then the little man with his long hair and Emersonian face edged his way past us and took his seat." Now, what's interesting about Emerson is Emerson gave a series of lectures on the philosophy of history at the Masonic Temple in Boston in 1837. This was the first time he managed a lecture series on his own, and it was the beginning of his career as a lecturer. The profits from the series of lectures were much larger than when he was paid by an organization to talk, and he continued to manage his own lectures often throughout his lifetime. He eventually gave as many as 80 lectures a year, traveling across the northern United States as far as St. Louis, Des Moines, Minneapolis, and California. Just interesting that he got his career started in the Freemasonic Temple. Now, back to Twain. I could have touched him with my hand. Mommsen, think of it. I would have walked a great many miles to get a sight of him. And here he was, without trouble or tramp or cost of any kind. Here he was clothed in a titanic, deceptive modesty, which made him look like other men.
All right.
That returns us to Anthony Grafton.
All right, and let's just plow through these last 7 pages or so here as quickly as we can.
Yeah, so Anthony Grafton, after studying at the University College London under the celebrated ancient historian Arnaldo Mamigliano from 1973 to 1974, he earned his PhD in history from the University of Chicago in 1975. He still retains links with the University of London's Warburg Institute. So just like Anthony T. Grafton, Professor Sir Israel Gallant is also an alumni of University College London, and Anthony T. Grafton's celebrated teacher, Arnaldo Mamigliano, is also an alumni, I believe. Now, the Warburg Institute is indeed related to the Warburg Bank dynasty. This is not the first banking dynasty that I have encountered in my studies. The Rothschilds are in contact with brothers Israel and Hermann Gallant, as I have evidence, which I don't have on screen. I'd have to go and cite them out of my books.
That's all right. Let's just dig through.
So the Warburg Institute was formed in Hamburg from the library of Abbie Warburg, a student of Renaissance art and culture and a scion of the wealthy Jewish Warburg family. As an art historian, Warburg had been dissatisfied with the aestheticizing approach to art history and was interested in a more philosophical and interdisciplinary approach. Now, when I wrote this, the bells were ringing in my head about your conversation with Gavin Kearney on regards to content versus context.
Right. There you go.
So while studying the culture of...
For those of you who are wondering what the heck Gavin Kearney's show was about, now you know.
So while studying the culture of Renaissance Florence, he grew interested in the influence of antiquity on modern culture, and the study of the second life of the classical world became his life work. The influence of antiquity on modern culture, or like the influence of fake history on modern culture. Like, what mind games can we play philosophically on these people? So in 1900, he decided to establish the Warburg Bibliothek für Kulturwissenschaft, which became an enormous private library built around this question and funded privately. Warburg, quote, famously forfeited his right to a share of his fortune on condition that his younger brother Max would buy him any books he required. And Warburg was joined in 1913 by the Vienna art historian Fritz Saxel, who in 1921 transformed the library into a research institute, later affiliated to the University of Hamburg. Neo-Kantian philosopher and professor at the newly founded university, Ernst Cassirer, used it and his students as well. Let's see here. And eventually the Warburg Library moves over to London because of World War II and the rise of Nazism. And 1944, it became associated with the University of London, which I believe we're leaving off. So before we progress any further on Anthony T. Grafton, I just want to talk about his celebrated teacher at the University College London, Arnaldo Dante Mamigliano, KBE, which is the Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. He was an Italian historian known for his work in historiography, characterized by Donald Kagan as the world's leading student of the writing of history in the ancient world. Now, I could take us into this rabbit hole of intel and modern warfare, but this could take an entire show.
Yeah, let's just skip it, and we'll make it an entire show, in a few weeks.
So suffice it to say, Donald Kagan is a Jewish patriarch of the Kagan family. He is father to Frederick and Robert Kagan, and all are founders of the neoconservative project for a new American century. And I'll just skip through some of the members there. I mean, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, George W. Bush, all names associated with this. George Bush's father, H.W. Bush, went to Andover.
That's the former DCI, head of Director of Central Intelligence, for those who don't know.
That is correct. So, I'm kind of curious how many people from this project are actually Freemasons.
Here's really the thing when it comes down to exposing the intelligence community, ladies and gentlemen. It's really this simple. Just check the primaries.
Yes.
That's it. That's all there is to it. There's no mystery or super secret process. I mean, you can use the trivium. It helps a lot to filter through their fallacies and gather grammar and explain how you did the whole process. But really, just check the primaries. The thing that these counterintelligence spin writers hate most is primary citations. So just always check them.
Always. So before
just to summarize that point, you can spend a lifetime believing a lie or a few minutes checking a primary citation.
I prefer to check. It makes me feel better.
Yeah, you know.
I can sleep at night that way.
That's basically the only difference between smart and dumb people. The smart people check citations. Dumb people don't believe that it matters.
So before we move on from the Kagans, I just want to note that Robert Kagan's wife is Victoria Newland. And you might remember her famous diplomatic blunder while serving President Barack Obama's administration as Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs at the United States Department of State, in which, while talking to the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, she said, F the EU, in a recorded telephone conversation, which you can find on YouTube. It's a conversation in its entirety. So we'll go back down to Migliano really quick here. So in 1936, he became professor of Roman history at the University of Turin, but as a Jew soon lost his position due to the anti-Jewish racial laws enacted by the fascist regime in 1938, and moved to England, where he remained. After a time at Oxford, he went to University College London, where he was professor from 1951 to 75. He visited regularly at the University of Chicago, where he was named Alexander White Professor in the Humanities, and at the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa. He wrote reviews for the New York Review of Books. In addition to studying the ancient Greek historians and their methods, he also took an interest in modern historians, such as Edward Gibbon, who was a Fellow of the Royal Society, a Freemason, and an author of the History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire from 1776 to 1789. Those dates were the release of his books, not when the Roman Empire fell. And Migliano wrote a number of studies on Gibbon's research. Let's see here. We can kind of skip some of this stuff here. After 1930, Migliano contributed a number of biographies to the Encyclopedia Italiana.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 30.
All right, I'll just pull it up here. It'll be faster, so we don't put the audience to sleep here.
Oh, we'll be closing down because this page will be quick. There's only a paragraph on it.
Yeah. All right.
After 1930, Migliano contributed a number of biographies to the Encyclopedia Italiana. In the 1940s and 1950s, he contributed biographies to the Oxford Classical Dictionary and Encyclopedia Britannica. In 1974, he was made an honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. A number of his essays were collected into volumes published posthumously. Always interesting about that stuff being released after people died. He died on September 1987 in London. He's also a member of the Warburg Institute.
Yeah, let's skip down here to the next page. I'm showing the citations on screen so people can pause and check those. Page 31.
Yeah, so now we're on page 31, and we're returning to Anthony T. Grafton and his career. Now, Anthony T. Grafton, again, is the author, or one of the contributors to the Scaliger collection, which will be integral to my study in Scaliger's biography, which we'll be getting to in a future episode. So,
which is the faking of the history, and this guy basically put together the overview of a 200-book collection on Scaliger and their rewrite of history.
Essentially, he's a bibliographer. Essentially, he supposedly knows all of the books. So, after a brief period teaching at Cornell's history department, he was appointed to a position at Princeton University in 1975, where he has subsequently remained. Since January 2007, did you see him when you were at Princeton? No, just kidding. Since January 2007.
Who knows? I mean, they had I was in the Firestone Library reading room, and they had an agent sitting behind me watching me the whole damn time I was in there.
Oh man, that must have been boring for that guy or gal.
And I was like, I kept looking at him. He's just sitting there in the chair, just watching me the whole time. I'm like,
wow.
Do you got anything better to do than sit there and breathe down my back, dude?
Should have brought him a rocking chair like that Seinfeld episode. And he just falls asleep.
Wow.
So anyway, since January 2007, he has been a co-editor of the Journal of the History of Ideas. Now, his works. Anthony Grafton is noted for his studies of the classical tradition from the Renaissance to the 18th century, and in the history of historical scholarship.
The history of historical scholarship. You see the double meaning in that. The history
of history.
The history of historical scholarship, but they've rewritten the whole history of historical scholarship and history itself.
It's just another palimpsest, another layer to put over that to cover things up.
Yeah.
So, and
you got to spread a thin veneer of bullshit on top of the 17 layers of bullshit.
His many books include a profound study of the scholarship and chronology of the foremost classical scholar of the late Renaissance, Joseph Scaliger, in 2 volumes, collating all of his work, I believe, from 1983 to 1993. Yeah. Now, I have a little note here because I looked up this book because I was like, 2 volumes, I need to get this. Well, it's 2 volumes.
$400.
$400 new or used. I mean, it's not necessarily rare. And it's incredibly expensive. So, I mean, if there's any, I really love doing this.
It's like that book that Steve Outram donated for me on right when I go to say it, the Brynathan Swedenborg, yeah, Emanuel Swedenborg. That book was like $400, man.
That's a really expensive book.
It's like, Brill Publishers, they don't want the common folk getting that one. They'll just skip right past that. You don't need to know about Agent Swedenborg for the king of...
And this one's obviously...
King George of Sweden.
And this book is obviously intended for wealthy students with, or people with student loans that can spend a lot.
Yeah, let's finish this up. We're getting segued here. Let's just keep digging through here.
Essentially, if anyone would like to donate the books to me, I'd really appreciate it.
It's on screen there, so people could pause and check that out. We're on page 32 now.
Yeah, we're closing it out here.
Yeah, let's just wrap it up, bring it full circle, and we're almost 2 hours in here.
And we'll definitely
let's just go.
So he also wrote a revisionist account with Lisa Jardine of the significance of Renaissance education, called From Humanism to the Humanities, printed in 1986. Now, I see Lisa Jardine, and I think about our second Scaliger episode where I read a passage on French romances and scarce histories in Volume 2 of the Abridged Dictionary of Pierre Bayle, where, Mary Catherine Desjardins is essentially indicted for mixing history with fiction and confounding the masses of people so that they would never understand what's true and what's fake. Go back to part 2.
We've never seen that trick before.
So go to part 2 at the end of that episode for my reading of that quote. And more recently, studies of Girolamo Cardano as an astrologer, who Scaliger treats and I'll be talking about later on, and Leon Battista Alberti. In 1996, he delivered the triennial E.A. Lowe Lectures of Corpus Christi College, University of Oxford, speaking on ancient history in early modern Europe. He is co-author of an article on the marginalia of Gabriel Harvey that is one of the founding pieces of scholarship in the new field of history of reading. The best introduction to the preoccupation with the relations between scholarship and science in the early modern period is perhaps still Defenders of the Text, one of his several essay collections, the most recent of which is Worlds Made by Words. It's an interesting one there, Worlds Made by Words, because you have nature and then you have the worlds of words, which is basically confounding the mind of man into believing things that aren't real. So in some ways, his most original and accessible
quantum physics, go ahead.
So in some ways, his most original and accessible book is The Footnote, A Curious History, a case study in what might be called the history of history from below. Now, it's interesting he wrote about a book about the footnote, but I have his book about Scaliger's works, and he has nothing about a general dictionary, historical and critical, which is all about footnotes. The entire nature of that book is footnotes. It's so popular. How could he miss that? Not only that, but I think it's the Dictionary of National Biography is born out of this. So, I mean, this is something that has a history that goes back. You can tie a line. Avoided it as of 1993. Perhaps maybe he's found it since. We'll just kind of go through here. I just kind of highlighted his books.
What page are you on?
We're on page 33. We're just starting to close it out here. All right. So now we see that one of the foremost scholars in modern academia on Joseph Scaliger is Anthony T. Grafton, an American scholar. How serendipitous that as of the 20th century, the home of the Scaliger family papers is now within the walls of the American Philosophical Society, founded by Benjamin Franklin, a fellow of the Royal Society. Now, you might recall in my last interview, in part 2, that Reverend Thomas Birch, fellow of the Royal Society, was a copyist for Benjamin Franklin, fellow of the Royal Society, during his visit to England. Thomas Birch wrote the Scaliger articles in the General Dictionary, Historical and Critical. Franklin's Kyre book is a collection of letters from his journey to England. Once considered lost to time, these letters were erroneously filed under Thomas Birch's files in the British Museum and discovered within the last 10 years. And we kind of have a history of the Philosophical Society. It was originally called, the Philosophical Society, as it was originally called, was founded in 1743 by Benjamin Franklin, James Alexander, Francis Hopkinson, John Bartram, Philip Singh Jr., and others, and is an offshoot of an earlier club, the Junto. It was founded 2 years after the University of Pennsylvania, with which it remains closely tied. Since its inception, the society attracted America's finest minds. Early members included George Washington, a Freemason, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, James McHenry, Thomas Paine, David Rittenhouse, Nicholas Biddle, Owen Biddle, Benjamin Rush, James Madison, Michael Hillegas, John Marshall, and John Andrews. The society had also recruited philosophers from other countries as members.
We don't need to, the names are all up there. Let's just skip down here.
All right, so let's see here.
Let's just bring it full circle here.
It's held at Philadelphia to promote useful knowledge, and Benjamin Franklin was elected the president once it was formally.
Now, for those who don't know, just a little tidbit on the American Philosophical Society. Aside from it being founded by the Hellfire Club member Ben Franklin, who is probably a pedophile and murderer. They found like 14 bodies in his basement, but that American Philosophical Society was a subcontractor for none other than the MKUltra sub-project.
You just gave away the thing I had at the end of my sheet, dude. So, Charles Darwin and Margaret Mead are notable members of the American Philosophical Society. And I was going to say, I'm curious about all the members of who are Freemasons. If one were to search in the Philosophical Society in Jan's database, it would find the society is MKUltra's Sub-Project 58. Its parents is Sub-Project 58. It is from this institution that Vernon Hall Jr. writes The Life of Julius Caesar Scaliger from 1484 to 1558. I have not had the opportunity to acquire this book yet. As we can tell, this is an important lead, so any help in supporting my work is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so, Gordon Wasson was MKUltra Sub-Project 58, and he lectured at the American Philosophical Society. And here I'll just bring up the database. Here we'll just go Sub-Project 58, right there in bright red. And then we can see MKUltra Sub-Project 58 lists it as National Philosophical Society, and then they say they can't find it. It was actually the American Philosophical Society, again, founded by Benjamin Franklin, and that was MKUltra Sub-Project 58. And then Wasson and John Marks helped create a bogus little story about that in The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, Chapter 7, which I exposed in my article, Spies in Academic Clothing. So that brings us to the conclusion. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Well, the people were trying to see what kind of a thread I was tying through this narrative. Essentially, Anthony T. Grafton, in his biography, led me down an entire journey into agent land and all these different publishing circles and all these connections to the Gallant's family and their connections. It just seems like there are just so many coincidences in here, and I don't like to be called a coincidence theorist, but...
Right. All right. So, well, so we've kind of brought it all full circle. We've shown folks all the way back to the origins of propaganda, which is also mind control propaganda, disinformation, a lie. something as simple as a lie can mislead or control the mind of somebody else. And this is something that people need to understand when they're trying to get their mind around what mind control is. It's not just hypnosis and sending somebody, like the Manchurian Candidate style nonsense. It's, it's drugs, it's a lie, it's deception, it's rewriting all of history under all of this Scaligerian nonsense that we've been exposing for episode after episode. And just getting, people to understand that all of that flows from Scaliger all the way through history into the Bernays, Freud and Bernays family, right to Gordon Wasson, right into Subproject 58. And today, we're in the middle of it, called the Psychedelic Revolution and New Age Hippie Movement, being promoted by the Esalen Institute and SRI and Tavistock and the CIA, etc. I can hardly, say CIA without getting a bad taste in my mouth. I'm going to have to rinse that out. So anyway, anything else to add really quickly, or are we at a wrap?
It feels good to get this weight off my chest because there's a lot of information I've had to carry, and it's good to get it out, especially because this is a lot of the foundation work to help me understand where we're going to be going with Joseph Scaliger's biography in the coming episodes. We can kind of see a concerted effort through several centuries. These historians who are tied to intelligence agencies and suspect societies and publishing groups, I'm starting to see that thread kind of weave all the way through them. So just kind of excited to get on to the next part.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap for tonight. Thanks for those of you who supported the show last week. Thanks for the emailed letters and donations, the mailed letters and donations. I appreciate them. Please support Jacob. Help him get a new computer. Yes. I appreciate the donation tonight in the chat. Also, please go to gnosticmedia.com. Support the show. Next week, we will have the infamous Dr. Hans Utter back. Of course, yes. He's probably the most popular guest we've ever had. So he will be back next week. And I think Bill Jocelyn is coming up sometime in the future.
All right.
So some excellent stuff there. See you all next week, and that's a wrap. I better pull up the window to turn it off. I forgot that part.
Jacob
all right.
Duellman at gmail.com.
Jacob Duellman at gmail.com. Now